The congressional delegation I'm a part of met with Secretary General Rutte, with President Zelensky. We just met with Ursula von der Leyen. And Europe and NATO in particular seem more united, more committed to their defense, more committed to an enduring partnership with the United States than I've seen in recent years, in a way that I think matters. There have been some real questions and concerns. The first time President Trump was in office, there was a great deal of tension with NATO, with the EU. His statements before becoming president and in his first few weeks led to grave concern about whether he would sustain support for NATO and support for Ukraine. Both of those seem to be moving in a positive direction. The critical minerals agreement was ultimately signed despite a very tumultuous and difficult meeting in the Oval Office between Trump and Zelensky some months ago. And we seem set for an announcement tomorrow by all 32 NATO member states to get to a 5% target. Look, there's been significant progress in recent years in terms of how much NATO members are spending on their defense. This is not just to satisfy the demands of an American president. This is based on a very real threat from Russia. Chancellor Merz was in the Capitol, I think, a week or two ago, sharing his assessment, and we've heard the same now in several meetings here, that Russia is rearming and building up its military far beyond what is required for the fight with Ukraine, for their continued aggression against Ukraine. They are preparing for war with NATO. And I think that is mobilizing and focusing the minds of all the folks I've talked to here.
Do you think that 5% commitment is enough, though? Because it's 3.5% on hard defence spending, 1.5% on other things, including infrastructure spending and maybe border security. It's pretty broad. Now, some people say that that is part of defence nowadays, but if you're talking in the context of a potential Russian aggression against a NATO ally, is that really enough?
It may not be, but we have to start moving in that direction. If it's not well coordinated, if we don't streamline, modernize, make more innovative our sclerotic and bureaucratic and antiquated procurement procedures, no amount of money will be enough. If we don't spend this money wisely, we'll simply dramatically increase our costs. We in the United States have between 4 and 5 sort of major defense manufacturing companies. They've really captured the markets. There's very few companies that make nuclear submarines, jet fighters, aircraft carriers. We are in the midst of trying to bring in private sector, innovative, technology-focused companies as we tackle with the consequences of the Ukraine conflict, drones, electronic warfare, counter-drone systems. But we have to accelerate it. We need European partners in doing this. We need to be less concerned about restricting each other from manufacturing and competing and more open to being the kinds of partners we were decades ago as NATO began, the kinds of partners we were under the very imminent pressure of Nazi aggression.
Actually, you put your finger on something I think that's really important. I mean, okay, we're all talking about an increase in proportion of GDP, but actually, how do you spend it?
Right.
And it's very easy to talk about an increase. It's a much more complicated question.
Right.
We've just had the Strategic Defence Review in the UK, which actually contains a lot of sense, but it doesn't really express what programs you're going to focus on. And I mean, like in the United States, you know, we have built, you know, these very expensive long-term procurement programs, great sophistication, but, you know, 10, 15-year programs.
Yes.
We can't do that any longer.
No.
How do we get over this problem?
So first, we have to really look hard at and learn the lessons of Ukraine. The lessons of Ukraine are that they have managed to survive and to fight hard by what we call MacGyvering. That's the name of a popular television show in the United States. I mean, think about it. They've received dozens of different platforms. You know, there isn't one tank. There isn't one armored personnel carrier. There isn't one howitzer. They've got dozens of different types, and yet they've managed to, without these complex supply chains and OEM contracts, they've managed to get them into the fight, service them, repair them, upgrade them. They've proved to be remarkably agile and innovative because they have to be. We have to have the same urgency. We lack urgency. We lack a sense that China might move on Taiwan in 2 years, that Russia might move on NATO in 2 years. And if we were acting like that...
Why is that? Because we are seeing it.
Lack of focus. We are incredibly distracted. I mean, social media is driving not just mental health challenges in our children and division in our electorates and our societies, but is distracting us from critical strategic focus. And no disrespect to President Trump, but a president who was elected by his mastery of Twitter, social media platform, is probably the most short attention span president I've ever seen. Now, he does still have some successes through that, through his combative, unpredictable style. But bluntly, the lack of a sustained critical focus on strategic issues is the biggest threat to our sort of Western shared values. And we don't just need to get better and smarter at procuring things like tanks and howitzers and armored personnel carriers. China believes they will leapfrog our advantages through artificial intelligence, scraping data from the world, and then winning in quantum computing, precision biology, and a half dozen other applications of AI. So we have to get faster, smarter, and more innovative today, not tomorrow.
And sorry.
No, but I was going to say, in the States, you've got all the high tech. I mean, okay, the Chinese regard this as the front line in achieving their strategic objectives, and they're written down very clearly in the document.
They're not hiding them.
They don't
They're not
hide
hiding them at all.
And they actually, express it in short sentences that are clearly understood. But you have this fantastic tradition of innovation in the States. How do you divert that, let's say, away? I've just been at a tech conference in California. Everyone's talking about AI, but in a context which isn't really related so much to defense spending if you're there with the entrepreneurs.
Well, now I'm going to comment in a way quite critical of our current administration. They are doing exactly the things that one would do if you were intent on destroying our advantage in competition and creativity. Dramatically restraining immigration, going after major research universities, blocking foreign students from coming to participate, defunding the National Science Foundation, defunding the R&D arm of so many of our different federal institutions. I mean, I think it's an owned goal. We are really hurting ourselves by how we are taking away several of the key things that have made Silicon Valley so successful. So it's my hope that we can change direction on that front. It was President Trump who, during the campaign, said foreign students who come to the United States to study all the hard sciences critical to AI should get a green card with their diploma. Now he's doing the exact opposite. Yeah. He's literally rounding people up in the streets and deporting folks who came to the United States as students. So we have to get smarter. We have to re-embrace the things that actually made us a global leader in innovation. But we have to partner and not be so frightened about sharing inventions and innovations with our European allies.
We can't go 2 minutes at this conference without talking about Donald Trump. It's impossible. And I'm really interested in something you said about social media distraction, because he has posted diplomacy in real time throughout the last 24 hours on Iran and Israel. But he's also posting WhatsApp messages he gets from world leaders, including Mark Rutte. He's posted a full WhatsApp message from Mark Rutte ahead of this conference. Is that a good way for a president to behave? How can you trust that any communication you have with him will stay private?
So at the end of the day, NATO is built on trust. Article 5, the whole architecture of NATO is built on we pledge ourselves to each other. That's what collective security means. And our intelligence services, our research into critical technology areas, our shared commitment to security all rests on trust. So conduct that undermines trust and that suggests that what should be private communications can be public at any time at the whim of any particular leader degrades trust. And so I think it's harmful to do things that would lead the Secretary General of NATO to now have to answer hours of awkward and difficult questions. My hope is that we will all still pull in the same direction and we'll all still see the overriding importance of NATO unity. But that particular move, I think, was not. It may have been to his own reputational advantage for a short period, but we have to trust each other. And if we don't, we're going to have a hard time holding together in the face of an increasing convergence between Russia, DPRK, Iran, and the PRC. We need each other more than we ever have. We need to not be distracted by short-term tariff fights, by disagreements internally or amongst each other. So bluntly, my hope is that we'll transcend any particular social media moment and be reminded that we have a deep history together. I had a chance to meet with a number of Dutch leaders yesterday and reminded them that it was in part the Dutch that settled my part of the United States, the state of Delaware, and that there's more than 8,000 American service members in a battlefield cemetery here in Holland. We have worked together, fought for each other, served in the common purpose of becoming a more and more just and inclusive society. And we are facing an increasing alignment between those who oppose that effort. We need to not take ourselves out of this fight by doing things that undermine our mutual trust.
Can I ask you another question which is sort of connected with the Trump phenomenon? It's not a criticism of him, but it's an observation. For example, I've personally, professionally been dealing with the nuclear problem in Iran many years ago, and we have reached a pretty critical point, possibly a resolution of the problem, but maybe it's too early to say that. What I don't understand about the Trump administration is the way that they sort of separate foreign policy issues. So you've got, Taiwan over here, you've got Iran here, you've got Ukraine here, and there isn't a holistic approach to looking at this as a single security issue. And for example, as a former professional, what worries me is the way that Ukraine is sort of separated out as a separate problem. And I think this is extremely worrying for European security.
So I just was on a bipartisan trip to the Philippines and Taiwan a couple of weeks ago. It is unmistakable in my view, and the view of many of my fellow senators, that what happens in Ukraine will have a profound influence on what happens with Taiwan. What happens with Iran will have a profound influence with what happens in a half dozen other states that may or may not decide that their security requires their having a nuclear weapon. It all connects. And to the extent that the United States builds trust, builds a global system, and invests in partnerships and alliances, I think we're stronger and safer. But there's clearly a very different view from some in politics in the United States, and certainly from his campaign. That's what President Trump said. We're going to separate these things. We're going to deal with them one at a time. We're not going to deal with them all together. I think a failure to see Putin clearly as the aggressor he is and as the malign force he is in Europe and for world security is a great failing on the part of our president. And it's my hope that as he's become more and more frustrated and begins to realize Putin's been playing him all along, and hopefully begins to realize that Putin will come to China's aid if there is any kinetic event in the Pacific. I'm hoping that they'll begin to see these things in concert, not in isolation.
Senator, I know you have to leave us, and we really appreciate having you on the podcast. Thank you for joining us here on One Decision.
Thank you very much. Look forward to being on again.
Please do come whenever you feel like it. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fascinating.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Sir Richard, the Senator may have to leave, but we are still here.
I'm your captive now.
You are my captive now. You're not going anywhere. I found that discussion really interesting, and particularly on this question of distraction, because it is concerning, isn't it? We are all here. NATO is here. All the allies are here in one place. And it's very difficult to keep people thinking about Ukraine and about Russia. There are those defense ministers and those who are really embedded in it who constantly fight for that to be the main narrative. But we would be lying if we said Donald Trump and his diplomacy online, Israel, Iran, isn't dominating here.
Well, of course it's dominating because it's so extraordinary what's happened. And I mean that really very striking that, you could have a flight of, 7 B-2 bombers that fly over Iran and attack the main, although for those of us who've known about this problem, it wasn't entirely unexpected. but it diverts attention, and because the tectonic plates in the Middle East are all beginning to shift. If you take the last 6, 8, 10 weeks, look what's happened. It's quite extraordinary. And you have this demonstration of absolutely raw Israeli power, which has proved to be irresistible in a way that I don't think any of Israel's opponents in the Middle East had imagined. So, what now are the political consequences of these huge changes? And the war in Ukraine has been running for 3 years. We've almost treated, I wouldn't say as a routine event, it's a dreadful event for the Ukrainians, it isn't routine at all, but it's been on our geopolitical menu for so long as such a big problem. Inevitably, when something big happens, you're going to look away and not forget about it, but not pay it maybe the attention it's due.
Israel's planning of what's happened with Iran, it seems to me, has been happening over a really long period of time. This is not something that Benjamin Netanyahu has struck on overnight or in the last couple of months. This is a long-term ambition. Some people say it's almost the thing that he can't see around. The issue of Iran is the issue that defines him in his own role. What do you think happens now if there is a ceasefire between these two countries, if there is a new nuclear agreement? What next for Israel?
Well, what next for Israel is probably more of the same.
So there is no end?
Well, there is an end to the immediate confrontation, I think. And, for example, there is an end in Syria because you have a different type of regime which has been disarmed. So Syria no longer is a nodal point of opposition for Israel. Maybe you have a fundamental change in Lebanon because instead of Lebanon being hollowed out and ruled by Hezbollah, maybe you're going to actually have a Lebanese government which will have power to implement its decisions, which it didn't do in the past. And of course, the key to all of this is now what happens in Iran, which is, you only got to look at the map. It's a massive country. It's 3 times bigger than France. Is that
huge,
right?
Yeah.
Population of 90 million?
I think 90, yeah.
Yeah. And the key question is, can the theocratic government survive this crisis? Because let's face it, its strategy is completely in tatters. It's totally fallen apart. But I think we're all aware that there is no apparent internal opposition at the moment. And it will, I think, take time, if the government really is that fragile and that weak, for it to begin to fall apart. I think my favoured scenario, if I had to speculate, is probably some sort of military regime coming in and taking control for a period of time, but maybe sort of retiring Khamenei on the grounds of age or something along those lines. Not necessarily a coup, but just to say a shift in the government. But it's impossible at the moment to say what will happen. But what happens in Iran is going to be crucial, because it isn't really just about Israel. It's really about the conflict between Sunni and Shia Islam as well. And, of course, the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Gulf states have stayed pretty silent. And, even Qatar, who now had missiles fired at them, okay, they made statements of objection, but they haven't, actually been directly party to these events. And it's a resetting. It is a resetting of the power structures in the Middle East.
Do you think Iran was surprised that none of its allies, however fickle, came to its aid?
Well, my question is, which one could practically have done?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there is a suggestion that President Putin has said he could help get the nuclear enrichment program started again for Iran, although I'm not sure how realistic that would be. I mean, some people had said that this conflict put China in a difficult position and that was partly why there was a suggestion that Iran might close the Strait of Hormuz. But actually doing that would have such a significant economic impact on China and Chinese exports that it would put them in a very difficult position, and that's why they sought an alternative.
Because but China have been very careful in the Middle East to be all things to all people.
Well, exactly. I suppose that's what I'm saying.
They've even built a close relationship, or had built a close relationship with Israel. So they've focused on Israel. They've focused on Saudi Arabia in particular. And okay, they've had an important relationship with Iran based on cheap energy, basically. But I think China have been very careful not to take sides directly. Okay, they make statements which are supportive of Iran, but not actually to do anything which compromises them in the future. And, I mean, Russia certainly haven't been able to resupply militarily. I mean, given that their bases in the Middle East have fallen apart, really, with the demise of Syria, what are they going to do? And I mean, they've got their hands full, really, fighting in Ukraine, so they can't resupply air defense missiles, which have proved to be surprisingly ineffective. So the Russians must be worrying about the viability of some of their equipment, which has been shown not to be very good.
Not to be particularly effective, which may well, as you say, make regime change, albeit from within, a more likely scenario. Because I was speaking to somebody earlier who was saying, although the Iranian people are deeply frustrated with the way that they feel the country is run, electricity is still working, phone signals still working. Yeah. It doesn't feel to them as if it's a country cut off, and therefore that impetus to try and force regime change is not there at the ground level, despite the frustration.
Yeah, and it's something that's dangerous to do, for individuals, because, there's still this infrastructure of, let's say, violence to suppress a dissatisfied population. We've seen it used. You've got these motorbike militia. I don't know, I can never remember the name of the paramilitary groups that support the IRGC. And I was reading today that there's been some pretty aggressive presence on the streets of these people since the Israeli attack started. And they're, checking individuals, checking people in all local towns, and really, being a pretty clear presence, and an oppressive presence and a violent presence, which frightens most Iranians. So, what do you do?
Yeah.
Do you come out on the street and risk your life?
Afghanistan. Look what happened in Afghanistan. Yeah. It ultimately didn't end well for those people. Yeah. It ended even worse for lots and lots of women. Yeah. It's a question that we won't be able to answer here at the NATO summit. Nobody will, because it's a watch and wait scenario. But Donald Trump obviously is going to be here and participating in a dinner. We know that President Zelensky is hoping to try and catch the American president at some point. What do you think that meeting will be like? Because Donald Trump has posted on Truth Social something like, I'm glad to be heading over to the NATO summit because it's going to be a lot easier than what I've just had to deal with Iran and Israel. He sees this as some kind of holiday.
Well, maybe. Well, he's achieved one important thing, which, let's face it, if it hadn't been for American pressure built up since his first term, there wouldn't be NATO agreeing to 5%. So his contribution to the, let's say, rebirth or reconstruction of NATO means that he can have a reasonably positive feeling about his achievements. He hasn't pulled the rug. And as the senators just told us, there is a positive aspect now to his attitude towards NATO, and the worst hasn't happened. Okay, there are still problems, but nowhere near things have happened in terms of the dire predictions as to the sort of undermining of NATO, the collapse of NATO. NATO's going in the opposite direction. It's getting much, much stronger. So that's a positive. And I think that, since that terrible confrontation in the White House with Zelensky, actually there have been evidence of an improvement in that relationship. So maybe, there will be a better outcome. And let's face it, the use of B-2s to attack the Iranian nuclear installations in the way that it was conducted was an extraordinary demonstration of the power and the reach of the United States in defense and security terms. That must have an impact on everyone watching. And you think, my God, no other country in the world could even begin to think of attempting that. Come close to attempting that.
I was looking on my phone because I was trying to find a post that Donald Trump had put on Truth Social. He has posted a WhatsApp message from Mark Rutte.
So I gather, but I haven't actually seen it yet.
Well, he seems to have posted it in full. And it is a message that essentially says, great for you to be heading to the summit, Mr. President. You have succeeded in bringing everybody together. This is your victory. You are the only American president that could have done this. Is that the right tone, do you think, to be taking with Donald Trump? Because it strikes me that that's quite a, if not patronising, it's certainly a very deferential tone.
Yeah, it is deferential. And maybe one could do it differently. But given Trump's character, why not? I think we get very caught up in the dramatic, in the sort of drama of the exchanges with Trump. But what's important about dealing with Trump is the essence of the outcome, and not really to be fazed by the language, by the swearing, by the rudeness. And I mean, I do find it confusing myself when one has to actually acknowledge that Trump has achieved the reconstruction of NATO, or, in the process, by insisting on, this massive increase.
Has he, though? Do you think, because this increase is an interesting question, it's a 5% GDP increase in theory. And as you pointed out rightly before when we were talking to the senator, it's not just about the GDP, it's not the numbers, it's how you spend it. But 1.5% of that is going to come from things like building bridges over roads, maybe even internet connectivity. It could also be border security. Is that really defence?
Well, yes and no is the problem.
It's a bit of a fudge, isn't it?
It is a bit of a fudge, but it's still, even 3.5% is a huge increase. Yeah. So, if the German economy really switches on its power, and they spend 3.5%, that's almost transformative for NATO in its own right. And, the strengthening of bridges, being able to land planes on motorways, having good satellite communications. I mean, all these things actually are highly and defence relevant, proper railheads, the way you can unload tanks and all of that sort of thing. Yes, that is. So it is a fudge, but on the other hand, it's important. And so Trump's achieved that. He's also, in my opinion, reset relations with China, or in the process of resetting relations with China. And the other huge problem in the Middle East was the Iranian nuclear program.
So give him a peace prize?
Well, I'm not sure I'd go that far yet. But which recent American president? I mean, if you take Obama's foreign policy, I would be highly critical of it personally, in spite of his achievements as a US president domestically. Mm-hmm. But his foreign policy, a lot of us were very unhappy with. And I'm very unhappy with Trump's style. But when I sit back, I have to say, well, hang on a moment. He really has made a difference in areas which could have very positive and important outcome for international.
That's the question. It's about could, isn't it?
Could have.
We don't know yet.
We don't know yet, but they could have for international security. And I've already expressed the view in the podcast that I'm worried about his lack of connecting Ukraine directly to these other problems and treating it separately. And I think that's a rather ill-informed and naive approach to international security.
We are here for a couple of days. It's the first day today. There is a big dinner tonight with all of the leaders. We are sadly not invited.
We
don't know where our invite was. What will you be doing tonight at NATO? Going out, partying, karaoke? What's your plan?
Me?
Yeah.
I'll be getting a good night's sleep in preparation for tomorrow's podcasts.
Well, it's probably good advice to all of us. So, Richard, great to speak to you.
Kate, it's very nice to be here, and it's great to be discussing these important topics.
And we will bring you all the latest from day 2 of the NATO summit here in The Hague, of course, on the One Decision podcast tomorrow.